the reality is that every major study that's been done, whether it's been done by the Anti-Defamation League, which is kind of vaguely pro-Trump these days, or it's been done by the FBI in the past, or it's been done by other, legal specialists, show that most of the violence that's done, political violence in the United States, comes from the far right.
I'm Joanna Coles. This is the Daily Beast podcast. What an extraordinary week it's been in America. Is this a watershed moment? We're here to discuss. Hugh Dougherty, our executive editor, who's been monitoring our incredibly busy news coverage over the last few days, and the brilliant David Rothkopf, former member of the Clinton administration and a former editor of Foreign Policy magazine, who's well-sourced throughout DC and who can shed light and always brings a very helpful perspective on really the remarkable events of the last few days. Huey, what else are we going to be talking about? Something else is going on this week.
Something else is going on this week, Joanna. Donald Trump is leaving the country and he is going to London, where he is going to have a state visit with King Charles. A man with more gold than the Oval Office, more properties than the Trumps, but much less power than the president.
And I'm very curious to know if King Charles will raise the subject of Donald Trump paving over Jackie Kennedy's rose garden.
He is known as the plant whisperer because he literally speaks to plants, and he cannot be pleased about any lawns being removed.
And I just can't imagine what the two of them talk about when they meet each other.
We don't have to imagine. We will soon find out exactly what happens between them.
You mean because Donald Trump will tell us?
Because Donald Trump will tell us, yes. There are some certainties in life, death, taxes, and that Donald Trump will tell us.
Well, that Donald Trump won't stop talking.
He will not stop talking.
All right, let's get into it. Normally, Hugh Dougherty, our executive editor at The Beast, and I would be joining David Rothkopf in his beautiful book-lined library. But David has had an auto emergency and he's actually at the shop. But we persuaded him to talk to us regardless. David, thank you. And I have to say, your auto shop looks a lot smarter than mine.
Well... You're very kind, and you're very kind to distract me from sitting around waiting for my car to be ready.
Well, we're excited to talk to you. There's so much going on. Hugh, I will volunteer, has been glued to Fox watching Kash Patel's tour. It's not an apology tour. What is it?
I think cynics might say, Joanna, that it is a Save My Job tour. Kash Patel, of course, before he was FBI director, had a distinguished career as, among other things, a cigar entrepreneur, a children's book author, MAGA children's book author, a podcaster, not as distinguished as anybody that I am speaking to here, and also a T-shirt hawker.
But didn't he used to sell MAGA merch?
MAGA merch, and it was branded Cash, K-A $H.
Right. Okay. So now he's head of the FBI.
Yes. And that promotion has proved a bit tricky for him. He has been the subject of a whispering campaign inside the MAGA world that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, has lost confidence in him, and that they are preparing for him to be replaced by Andrew Bailey, who is a newly appointed deputy. So he's been on the Fox and Friends sofa this morning, and he will be on with Sean Hannity later. And it really is an attempt to save his job, is how people are seeing it.
And Andrew Bailey was brought in to sort of job share with Dan Bongino, formerly a podcaster, currently number 2 at the FBI, because Dan Bongino, like Kash Patel, have long been supporters of Release the Epstein files.
Right. And Kash Patel has been very damaged inside the MAGA world by the Epstein fallout. He said, he and Dan Bongino, when they were in private life, were inflaming this situation, and they were talking about release the secrets, tell the truth. They then got the opportunity to release the secrets and promptly told MAGA, oh, in fact, we're not releasing any secrets, and there aren't any interesting ones anyway, and we'd all like you to move on. But people have not.
Is Dan Bongino also part of the whispering campaign?
It looks like Dan Bongino and Kash Patel probably come as a joint deal, but it's Kash Patel who's definitely got his head above the parapet on this one.
So he's been doing the rounds of the Fox News sofas.
Yes, and he went on Fox and Friends, and it was, by Fox and Friends standards, this is normally a very friendly environment for those who are part of the Trump world. He was asked a fairly direct question by Brian Kilmeade, who asked him, why did you post on X that there had been an arrest of a possible suspect, and it turned out that this was completely wrong. This person was entirely innocent. And he said, I was just keeping people up to date. But that's not really what we expect from the head of the FBI. We don't expect a live blog. We expect accurate facts. And
I think, didn't NBC report that when he was doing that, he was actually tucking in to a delicious meal at Rayo's, the almost impossible to get a table restaurant at. It's only got, I think, 8 tables. They're all already subscribed to people. And to get a seat at Rayo's comes with incredible cachet. John Kennedy Jr. used to have a table there.
Yes, exactly. He posted this on Twitter at 6:21 Eastern Time, and as soon as the doors opened on this incredibly exclusive restaurant, which is basically a private club in Manhattan, he was spotted going in. It's known for, among other things, its meatballs and its sauce, but it's certainly an eyebrow-raising aspect of this that the head of the FBI was not anywhere near the manhunt. He was not at FBI headquarters. He was not at Quantico. He was in New York, dining in a very exclusive venue.
So, David, you have plenty of sauces, not tomato sauces, I hasten to add, from Rayo's. Well, you may have Rayo's tomato sauce because they do actually bottle it. It's delicious. It's quite expensive. It is rather good. But you have plenty of law enforcement sources, intelligence sources. You are a fixture on the Washington landscape, and I know you talk to lots of people. What are they saying about Kash Patel?
Well, no one has really ever thought Kash Patel was up for this job. He has no experience in this area, really, to speak of. He was primarily seen as a provocateur and as a podcaster. Earlier you mentioned that Pam Bondi is losing confidence in him. I'm not 100% sure that she or anybody ever actually had confidence in him. And I think people were waiting for, the first issue to come up where he would reveal himself to be incompetent. As it happens, that's this issue where a friend of his was murdered. And he both managed, this kind of feat of appearing too close to this in a way that actually may have some legal consequences, and also, too out of touch to actually know what was going on. And so, he within the FBI, of course, over the course of the past couple of weeks, as, people have seen, or months even, as people have seen the firings that have gone on because people were involved, for example, in the January 6th investigations, there is a huge amount of resentment among FBI agents towards Kash Patel. And that's only been compounded. He and Bongino got onto a call, which I think you've reported about at The Beast, to say, you've got to find the guy. There's a lot of pressure on us. And it was profanity laden. And that also alienated more people within the FBI to think that he's not competent because he's not competent.
That's a rather depressing conclusion. I mean, can I just, having covered many of these types of events, not perhaps as big as Charlie Kirk, but certainly having covered crimes in states across the country, I have some sympathy for law enforcement because this isn't always very straightforward who's done it. Yes, there was a picture. Kash Patel seemed absolutely furious that they hadn't shown him the picture as soon as they had it, and they'd obviously delayed giving it to him. But they did release the photo, which carries its own burden because often people come up with false leads, right? And they did get the guy. I mean, they may have got him because his family gave him up, but within 30 hours, the alleged killer had been taken into custody.
I think the Kash Patel of this is that there is clearly, he has a major problem with his FBI agents, that they do not respect or trust him. And we don't really know the full truth of this 12 hours delay in giving him the photo, but he had just tweeted something that was wrong and badly wrong and potentially set back the investigation. So it's conceivable and understandable that FBI agents might not pass him material in case he tweets it.
Right.
He's also aggressively trying to claim that this was an amazing investigation at his direction. He used the words me, my, and I believe 15 or 16 separate times in the course of a 7 or 8 minute interview on Fox. And he's really trying to own the idea that the arrest was down to his actions. MAGA people who are not getting behind this say, well, it was just luck. He got, the father turned in the suspect. And that's not brilliant police work.
Well, I suppose if he does get fired, we're all podcasters, so we might get offered the director of the FBI.
Joanna, I can think of nobody better, but I think actually I can. David Rothkopf.
David, I think, would you like to be head of the FBI?
No, but I will work. When you become the head of the FBI, Joanna, I would be very happy to work for you.
God help us if that happens. That's all I'm saying. That would, I mean, Kash Patel might be incompetent running it. I'm not saying I would do it any better.
And what do we think of Andrew Bailey? Potential replacement. Currently sharing the job with Dan Bongino as the number 2.
Well, the advantages he brings is that he is absolutely he's absolutely MAGA. There's no doubts about his loyalties. He was Attorney General of a very conservative state, Missouri, where he was a very conservative Attorney General, and that the ability to manage things is clearly a problem for Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. As for how he is viewed in national security circles, David, I'll defer to you on that.
Yeah, David, what do you know about Andrew Bailey?
Well, no, I mean, he's seen as a conservative politician. I think he's probably more in tune as a former attorney general with Pam Bondi. And Pam Bondi has, over time really solidified her relationship with Trump by demonstrating, herself to be his lawyer, following through, defending him in all things. And I think, Kash Patel got into this because he was sort of a, bright light in the MAGA universe, not because he was particularly well suited to this. Whereas if Pam Bondi got to remake this in her image, a guy like Bailey makes more sense. Having said that, I don't think he's going to be extremely well trusted among most FBI agents. These purges have really done a lot of damage, and their lack of concern for the business of the FBI, sending FBI agents into Washington, D.C., for example, or putting them on to, deal with Trump administration priorities has taken them away from their core jobs. The FBI has been asked not to really track foreign, espionage in ways that it did in the past. Other things that have been extremely important to the FBI and are extremely important to the national security community have gotten shunted aside because their agenda is political. And I don't think putting Bailey in this position is going to diminish skepticism that much. Although, having said that, Kash Patel's a terrible choice. And, Bailey is somewhat more competent. So we're going to go from the bottom of the barrel to a little above the bottom of the barrel.
Is there anything in Kash Patel about him claiming that the reason he tweeted out, and I totally get that he tweeted out the wrong thing, but his argument that we are trying to be transparent, we're trying to tell people what's going on?
I think there are two answers. There's many answers to that. There's two answers to that. And one is, that sounds like a good idea. It sounds like a helpful idea. Transparency is a great thing. The other answer is that the FBI are the premier law enforcement organization, maybe in the world, because you trust them. You trust that what they say is true. And one of the big problems that Pam Bondi and her prosecutors, specifically in Washington, D.C., are finding is that they can't get indictments past grand juries on their chosen causes. And the diminution of trust in the FBI is extremely dangerous. And the reason not to be transparent in real time is because you need to be sure it's true and it's right and it's accurate, because people need to trust the FBI. And if people stop trusting the FBI, then they can't, it attacks the basis of prosecutions. It's a difficult path to go down for an organization that spent, David, you will have far greater historical context on this than I do, but 50 years ago, it was in a disgraceful position after J. Edgar Hoover and after Nixon, and it really has clawed its way back and made itself an organization people trust.
Yeah, it certainly has improved its reputation from the days of J. Edgar Hoover. But having said that, reputations are easily destroyed, and when you have an FBI director who's going out and spreading things that aren't true, he says it's transparency, but it's not transparency if what you're saying is a lie, right? It's not just giving words doesn't create transparency. You actually have to give perspectives on the truth. And they've tried to be ahead of this story for political reasons, and that continues to be an issue. I thought it was quite interesting that Governor Cox of Utah yesterday spent a lot of his time on morning shows saying we don't know what the motive is yet. Whereas Patel and these others have been trying to attribute a motive, trying to say that this is political, J.D. Vance took over Charlie Kirk's podcast today, had on Stephen Miller, and they were talking about the left being behind all of this violence and turning the power of the government against the left. And so, what you really see here is that there is a move from Trump and from Miller and from J.D. Vance and from a lot of these people not to solve the crime, not to be transparent, but actually to use the crime as a justification for their authoritarian power grab. And the real story this week is not mourning Charlie Kirk. It's how is this administration going to use the death of Charlie Kirk as an excuse to overreach, to target their enemies, to gain more and more executive powers. That it's a trigger. If it's not quite the Reichstag moment some people are calling it, it's the same exact game where you look for an excuse to grab power. And that's what's going on right now.
Well, you mentioned Spencer Cox, Governor Cox of Utah, who I thought was masterful in the way that he took over from Kash Patel at the press conference when they announced that they got him. And of course, he used the phrase, "we got him," reminiscent of George Bush talking about Saddam Hussein. And he is a moderate Republican, and it's been extraordinary to see him emerge. I mean, he's been a governor that's been very much under the national radar, extremely critical of Trump in the past. He was a supporter of Marco Rubio. When Marco Rubio in 2016 didn't carry on with the race, he then switched his allegiance to Ted Cruz. He said he would never vote for Hillary Clinton, but he also wouldn't vote for Donald Trump. And suddenly he finds himself in the spotlight. And I thought he was very impressive at that press conference, letting Kash Patel do his thing and then literally leaning on the podium and saying, okay, social media is not real. Get the grass under your feet. Go out there. Democrats and Republicans have been calling me. They're telling me they're talking about this. We must get together and talk about this. And it felt very reassuring.
Well, this is a really intriguing moment with Spencer Cox coming forward onto the national stage. It is quite possible for the governor of Utah to speak to the people of Utah and nobody else to notice.
Right.
And we haven't really seen much of him. He did a kind of media tour in 2023 with Jared Polis, who's the Democratic governor of Colorado, obviously the neighboring states, and their theme was disagree better. So he's coming forward and he's presenting a different version of being a modern Republican, and he has done it in a way that has clearly resonated with people about social media. He, I think, is going to get people talking about presidential candidacies. Whether he's interested in that, we don't know, but it's certainly something that people are going to start talking about.
Well, I think he's a sort of riveting figure. I mean, having not known anything about him, I've frantically been reading up on him. And the most exciting thing that I want to share with both of you, although you may have known is he's related to an Osmond. He's related to Merrill Osmond, one of the Osmond brothers. Not as good looking as Donny Osmond, but
there's only one
Donny Osmond, but his brother-in-law is actually Merrill Osmond's son, which I found really intriguing. But he's also a fascinating character. Got into Harvard Law School, didn't go to Harvard Law School, is Utah educated through and through, married to his college sweetheart. They have 4 kids. It's a very Utah story. Anti-abortion, but in fact banned laws that would have forbidden trans students from taking part in sports on the grounds that there were only 4 trans students in the state. And he said, most of them are actually struggling to stay alive. There's a 56% suicide rate among this group. And so he sounds like, and he's actually passed various legislations to help LGBTQ groups. So he's a very nuanced Republican governor, I think, of the kind we haven't seen for a long time.
Well, let's be.
David,
I know David doesn't agree with me here. You think I've been seduced by Governor Cox, and I
do, and
I may have been a bit.
I think it's the Osmond connection, which mesmerized you. But I mean, is he more nuanced than Donald Trump? Yes. Is he a conservative Republican who by, sort of any normal Republican standards prior to 10 years ago would have been considered pretty far right? Yes. Part of the sort of sensitivity on the issues of gay people in Utah has to do with the fact that historically gay people were treated pretty badly by the Mormon Church. And there were some real problems that took place at Brigham Young University and these other places across Utah. And they responded to it, and they responded in a constructive way. I believe, he is a genuinely, unlike Trump, who talks about religion as if he were reading it off of a cue card.
And while holding the Bible upside down.
Right. Well, June 1st, 2020, when he did that, when he walked across to the church at his daughter's suggestion. It wasn't even his own idea. I think he genuinely believes these things. And who knows? I think it's quite possible that Trump and Miller and Vance and all these other people go far too far, even for the Republican Party, and you get on your way to 2028 to people starting to say, well, can we do something a little better than that? Marco Rubio, who I think is trying to position himself to be that, has undermined his credibility a great deal by, turning into a poodle for Trump. And so somebody like this guy might emerge. Now, having said that, you're saying, I see him and he's great and he's a great alternative to Trump. If other people in the media agree with you, Trump will put the kibosh on him. They'll bury this guy because they won't want the competition for Trump. And I would note that, a lot of this story in the past week has been in Utah. But in this next week, the funeral is taking place in Arizona. And I think the story is going to shift, and it will allow them to change the cast of characters a little bit to suit the president, who is actually going to the funeral on Sunday at the Arizona Cardinals NFL football stadium. I think what you're going to end up with is the world's first funeral / MAGA rally.
Right.
And it's going to be pretty hideous.
The Sunday event has been described as a memorial service.
Right.
But I don't think we actually right now have precise details of how that is then followed by a private service of, at his church. He was a mainline Protestant, although he had recently been attending Catholic church with his wife, who is a Catholic. So we I think are slightly unclear on that, but we definitely are getting a Trump rally.
Well, I saw Kerry Lake getting very excited that something is going to be happening.
She's fantastic. She's fantastic, isn't she? She was saying that the reason this guy killed Charlie Kirk was because he was corrupted by college education, and that mothers should not send their children to college because they could end up being killers.
Well, as a mother, I would say that if I would be nervous about having a child go to that rally, actually. I think that it's scary to be in big crowds of people right now, especially people who are angry.
I think...
No doubt.
I think the point you make about crowds and angry is we are seeing the reaction to Charlie Kirk's death is playing out. We will see this huge event, clearly huge event with Trump at it, but we're also seeing it play out on social media. The thing that the Governor Spencer Cox was so vehemently speaking out against, but on social media there's a whole lot of anger, and it's directed from Charlie Kirk supporters, from MAGA, towards people who are criticising Charlie Kirk and saying that they don't want to share in that grief. And I think as a moment of danger, there's certainly going to be a huge security presence at this funeral, but it may well be that the danger here is much, much wider than that.
And the danger is on social media.
Danger is on social media, and the danger is that social media is being used to target people who do not agree with the grief over Charlie Kirk. And that would appear to be what used to be called cancel culture and used to be the thing opposed by the right.
And the president of the Oxford Union, who's just about to take up his position, has got into trouble for saying Charlie Kirk LOL and claiming that in the speed of the moment and the height of the moment, he sort of jumped in, and various people have reported him, and now there are calls for him to resign or whatever, and he's saying it's just free speech. When Charles is just debated in Oxford.
Let's try to put this into some perspective, okay? The reality is that every major study that's been done, whether it's been done by the Anti-Defamation League, which is kind of vaguely pro-Trump these days, or it's been done by the FBI in the past, or it's been done by other, legal specialists, show that most of the violence that's done, political violence in the United States, comes from the far right. And this, they are trying to use this. In fact, J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller once again tried to perpetuate this notion that the left do the same. The left don't do the same. Most of the people who have gotten fired or called out have not been people making fun of the death of Charlie Kirk. They've been people quoting Charlie Kirk. There's a woman, Karen Adia, who was the writer for the Washington Post, who got fired over the weekend, not for saying anything about Charlie Kirk per se, but simply quoting Charlie Kirk saying that black women were not smart enough to be taken seriously in jobs. Okay, and because she quoted him, she was fired. When Matthew Dowd was on MSNBC and said this was a divisive figure, he got fired for saying that. And so these are not people going, oh, haha, this guy is dead, although there's some idiots on the internet saying that, just as there are idiots on the internet saying everything. And it's not like the left is behind this sort of wave of violence. And so the question you have to ask is, what are they doing? Why are they spreading this particular narrative? And the answer is to serve themselves politically, to shift the blame off of them, but also to justify the president taking special steps and to give, Stephen Miller, apparently, I was listening this morning to something, and Stephen Miller apparently has got a plan that he's working on, a sort of post-Charlie Kirk murder plan to enable them to gather more power, more rights, more prerogatives to go and target their enemies. And so, hear the words, but ask yourself, what are their motives? What are they really trying to achieve?
I think the other thing worth adding to that is the factual background to violence, that we should just point out that before Charlie Kirk and his tragic death, the most recent tragic deaths were of Melissa and Mark Hartman, who were murdered because she was a Democratic lawmaker.
And their dog.
An absolutely chilling example of violence. And it's been very clear that the suspect was fueled by far right-wing views, extremist views that came from the right. And one of the things that is not being encouraged here by J.D. Vance, by Stephen Miller, is any honest appreciation of exactly what has been going on in this country.
Well, and I think we said last week on Friday, David, this is also about mentally ill young men with access to firearms. You think of Thomas Matthew Crooks, who tried to assassinate Donald Trump last July and who had a list of people that were his targets, and one of them was Joe Biden. And it was just that Trump happened to visit Butler, Pennsylvania, which was near to where Thomas Matthew Crooks lived, that he was the victim there.
America's gun violence problem doesn't have to do with political violence.
Right.
It has to do with primarily young men who have access to guns and who don't have access to mental health care and who have too much access to video games and are too alienated from their society. If it's not young men, it's older men. But men with guns, with mental problems, or with grievances are our issue. And again, it suits people to say, oh, we have a political violence problem in America, and it's on both sides. When in fact, that is not what motivated the shooting attempt at Trump. That's not what motivated, it wasn't, what motivated this last one, as far as we can tell. And a lot of the cases that we have seen have been more, sort of deranged people. But a lot of them have also been right-wing. The guy who took automatic weapon and shot up the CDC was motivated over, anti-vax stuff. There have been some anti-Semitic attacks. And although the right tries to say, well, that's, the left is the anti-Semites. No, there's a core racist component to the far right that is well known. Trump is the one who praised Nazis marching in Charlottesville. And so, it's hard to sort this out because there's so many people peddling so many narratives. And I think people who are listening to this really need to slow down, try to find the facts, not listen to Kash Patel, and try to understand the motives of the people who are speaking.
Well, Trump Trump is setting off for London this week, right? For a state visit where there will be a big white tie dinner for him and King Charles and Melania, our First Lady, who seems to have emerged from a hiding recently. We saw her at the 9/11 memorial. Will be meeting Kate Middleton.
It's going to be amazing as a spectacle. Donald Trump, of course, met the late Queen Elizabeth, and everybody remembers that he actually managed to walk in front of her, which is something you do not do when the Queen is inspecting her own troops. You don't walk in front. He and King Charles are not soulmates. There's there's demographic overlap. They're both boomers. After that, I don't think they've got a huge amount in common, but he is going to be absolutely in love with the spectacle. He loves the spectacle. And if anybody's got more gold than he does, it is, of course, the British royal family, who've got a selection of gilded palaces to welcome him at.
And the gold coach for him to ride.
Gold coach for
newly refurbished.
Yes. And we will see Melania going out with Kate and out with scouts.
Not with Prince Andrew.
And we will not see Prince Andrew in any shape or form. So he and Donald Trump, who of course were photographed together in Mar-a-Lago in the year 2000 with Jeffrey Epstein, don't get to reminisce about their friend.
And I wonder if King Charles will raise the spectre of the concreting over of Jackie Kennedy's rose garden.
Well,
because we know he has a huge garden at Highgrove,
yes.
his home, his personal home. And he's a massive supporter of, obviously, wildlife. He was banging on about climate change before anybody cared. The environment, I should say.
The king is such a dedicated gardener that he speaks to his plants and his trees.
More than he does to his gardeners. This was a recent story that 11 out of 12 of his gardeners had felt that he wasn't treating them as well as perhaps he could have done.
He is apparently a bad boss, so maybe he and Donald Trump can bond over some aspects of that.
Right, no word from the flowers on what they think about what he talks about with them. David, I'm sorry if this is all getting very English for you, but we grew up understanding that King Charles, as he is now, certainly Prince Charles, then used to talk to plants. There was a documentary.
Yes, look, my mother thought that she was English, and so when I was little, she grew up in Manhattan, but she aspired to being English. And so the first, when I was first trip overseas, we were brought to Hampton Court and Windsor and so forth, and trained to believe that was the height of civilization. I've since learned better, but I don't want to get into that here to fear of offending.
Scottish civilization, which is the height of civilization.
Will outnumber you if you do that. Madonna, your mother and Madonna. I remember meeting Madonna. I actually went to Madonna's house on the Upper East Side to interview her for something, and she actually greeted me in an English accent. And then she asked me in an English accent if I would like some tea. It was very surreal.
Is Donald Trump going to do this? Is
Maybe.
that what's going to happen?
Do you think he'll walk in front of Prince Charles?
Oh, I think...
Or King Charles.
Almost certainly. He is going to find some way to insert himself into this that is possibly bad manners, and obviously people are too polite to mention. The Queen did not say, Donald, out of my way. She just let him get on with it.
But don't you remember the last time President Biden went for a visit with King Charles, who was actually then Prince Charles? I'm sorry to get so confused. The Queen was still around at that point. He was mocked for what felt like leaning on Prince Charles, because it wasn't clear he was going to actually make it up some steps. And so was he leaning on him? Either way, you're not supposed to touch the royal other than let them give your hand a squeeze.
And we are in debt to Joanna Coles, OBE, for that advice.
Well, I was actually going to say, given the bruises that Donald Trump has had on his hands, which Carolyn Levitt, his press secretary, says are because he's been shaking so many hands, he should actually get advice on how the royals do it. Because, David, just in case, you put your hand out if you're a humble supplicant or in the crowd, and they take it and they give it a gentle squeeze, but you don't shake it vigorously, leaving the president or the monarch with large, unsightly bruises, which then need to be covered up with makeup.
Is there a royal cure for cankles?
I don't think King Charles has cankles. It'll be very interesting to measure their ankles, cankles, and see if there's any difference.
Wow. Will it be interesting?
Well,
are these people really interesting?
Fair point, David.
I'm sort of more of a product of the Monty Python upper class twit view of this whole thing. And we have these ridiculous
sympathy in here for that.
Yeah, and you've got a lot. You've got these ridiculous people, and I think one of the things that we shouldn't lose sight of here, with Donald Trump going off to be ridiculous with these ridiculous people, is the ridiculousness of it all. Because, Donald Trump, what he's trying to do right now is collect all the possible perks of presidenting that he can. I'm going to go and be greeted by these people, and I'm going to live in a gilded room, and people are going to treat me this way, and I'm going to build a ballroom with 900 people, and it's there. And the whole idea of the ballroom is so that 900 people celebrate him. And what could be, where do you learn how to treat ridiculous people ridiculously? But in England, with the royal family, which is a vestige of this kind of idiocy that should long ago have disappeared. But of course it hasn't, because, it's entertaining.
But I'd also say there is a fairly serious lesson, and David, you're absolutely right about the supermarket sweep of presidential chotskis that he's been amassing. But he's also trying to amass power. And gilding the Oval Office is funny and revealing, but what we are definitely seeing is that there is an opportunity presented by the death of Charlie Kirk that Stephen Miller has outlined that he is drawing up a plan. It's of a piece.
And yet there is still the spectre of Jeffrey Epstein lingering, and one thinks of now the incredibly complex logistics of this visit to the UK, which have been wildly disrupted by the resignation of Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador to Washington, who was in charge of this trip and in fact was frantically trying to make sure that all went well, and who's now out of his job because of the birthday book in which his 4-page letter with photos to Jeffrey Epstein was laid bare for everybody to see. And he said, Jeffrey, you were how? So I'm expecting a bump in logistics.
Well, I think, but I think you put your finger on what is the real story here, which is the Epstein subtext with Prince Andrew and with Mandelson and with Trump and with the whole royal, all the turmoil in the royal family around Prince Andrew's experience there. So, hopefully that, that'll attract some of the attention here. Trump's just going to want a break. He just wants a break from all the miserable stories that he's had to deal with. And, of course, who knows? Maybe the actual British government will show up there. But I do want to say one thing before,
before you collect your car,
well, yeah, that probably won't happen anytime soon. But I do.
Before our live stream,
the price of admission to hear Hugh say tchotchke with a Scottish accent is worth it.
It's always worth it. David, I get that thrill every day. Please go and collect your car. Thank you very much for giving us perspective and wisdom, as always. I always like to remind people you served in the Clinton administration. You were the editor of Foreign Policy magazine, and you bring such wisdom to everything you talk about. And there were lots of wonderful comments about your perspective last week on YouTube, which I'm sure you haven't read because you are a modest man. But if you go and read them, I think you will feel cheered.
You're very kind. I'm not sure what this YouTube you speak of is. But
all right, David, go and get your car, drive safely, and we will see you soon.
See you soon.
So I'm mindful of the fact that King Charles still has cancer and that it's treatable, but it's not curable. And of course, he'll be meeting Donald Trump, who's 79, with his cankles and his chronic venous interruption, which means his own blood pressure is more challenged now as he reaches 80. Two old white guys hanging out together, both with a lot of power.
Two old white guys, indeed, both with, certainly the president has a lot of power. The king technically doesn't have a lot of power, thanks to hundreds of years of history. But there will be a completely different perspective on this because we will also see two much younger and incredibly famous women hanging out together. The royal visit, the state visit, will include Princess Kate and the First Lady Melania Trump going to an engagement, as they are called in British royal parlance, with some young scouts, and that's going to be a split screen moment of the old and the young Gare, and I think show people it's kind of an interesting moment. Is it time for some generational change?
Do we think that? Why do we think Camilla's not meeting the First Lady?
We don't exactly know. Of course, you will meet the First Lady at the white tie dinner and will formally be there with the King when they welcomed them to to Windsor Castle. But that engagement of Melania and Princess Kate will, as you say, not feature the Queen. We don't really know much about the Queen's thoughts on Donald Trump or Melania Trump. She isn't a particularly discreet person, but this one, she has clearly has decided not to address that in any shape or form.
And this is the second state visit for Donald Trump, which is very unusual, right? Normally the royal family only hosts one head of state throughout their sort of stateship, as it were.
And people thought the great thing the British royal family are amazing at is that they will change any rules if it helps them. If you need to divorce your wife, you set up your own church.
Henry VIII.
If you need to get rid of a problematic king, then you invent the idea of abdication and send him off to France with his American wife.
Edward VII.
And if you're worried if you're worried about the perception that the male firstborn must be king, then you can change the rules. So if Prince William and Princess Kate had had a girl, she would actually have been queen. As it happened, they had a boy. So another rule seems to have been torn up here. It used to be you thought this one head of state from another country, in this case President Trump, only gets this big official state visit welcome once from the monarch. But rather handily, there have been two monarchs for Donald Trump's presidencies.
Oh, so of course the Queen oversaw the first visit,
Yes.
the King. And I was remembering the moment when Keir Starmer produced with a great flourish when he was sitting to Donald Trump's right, I think, in the White House, in the Oval Office, a letter from the King. And Donald Trump read it out loud because he was clearly so proud to receive a letter from the King.
Totally starstruck by the royals. He says it's all because of his mother that she loved the royals. She, of course, was Scottish. And obviously followed the royal family from 3,500 miles away. But yes, he is absolutely starstruck by the royals. They've got way more gold than he does. They've got way more properties than he does. And they don't have it anymore, but they used to have way more power than he does.
And I will say they throw a better parade.
They throw an excellent parade, and he will be taking notes, I think, back when he sees it in action.
Well, something we'll look forward to. He was starstruck by the royal family. I was starstruck by the Osmonds.
They are royalty too, in their own way.
Royalty.
And they're a big family, so there's an Osmond for everyone.
There is an Osmond for everyone. If you have been, thank you for joining us. Feel free to leave us a comment on YouTube, and much more excitingly, join the Daily Beast community on YouTube, where you get all sorts of extra content, and Michael Wolf, that is, and I'm sure we'll try and persuade David Rothkopf too to answer some of your comments. Hugh, what else do I need to say?
If you join the membership scheme, then I will translate for people who didn't understand me.
Okay, fair. Although now we can get those Apple headphones that give simultaneous translation, which, myopic observers of the Daily Beast podcast may want to employ.
That's a big threat to my to my unique appeal, I think. I thought being not understood was why people were subscribing.
So subscribe to the Daily Beast, dailybeast.com. Subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Inside Trump's Head with Michael Wolf. He is still in London. I wonder if he's trying to jostle himself a ticket to the state dinner.
Is he there for a state visit himself?
Maybe he is. And of course, as our First Lady, who's emerged from hiding, would say, be beast. And thank you to our production team,
Devin Rogerino, Anna Von Usen, and our editor, Jesse Millward.